I want to do a video explaining the term rewilding. A lot of people have been asking me, what does rewilding mean? The name of my channel is The Renewed Rewilder, and a lot of people are saying, what is that? What is it that you do? So I thought that I'd just take some time and kind of do some explaining for people who are not familiar with the term. Rewilding in its most basic essence means returning to a wild state, or you could also say that it's returning to a state of being that your ancestors lived in. Is generally considered a secular term in that it's not really a religious term at all, and the common definition of rewilding would normally exclude some concepts that are familiar and common in the Christian faith. So, for example, a lot of the philosophies of rewilding center around the idea that that humans have evolved from a more primitive state of animal. And so there's a certain essence of trying to reach back more towards not necessarily a pre-human state, but certainly acknowledging or trying to recognize how a certain pre-human state affected human physiology and optimal human health. In a lot of Christian circles, that idea is really not that's not how we would phrase things. It's not necessarily reflective of our beliefs in many Christian circles. In many Christian circles where we believe clearly that we were created uniquely by God and that we are not evolved from some more primitive pre-human state, many of us accept that as humans that we may have evolved, but that we were never in a primitive pre-human animal state. So there are some things like that where the main philosophies of rewilding run up against some Christian theology and Christian ideas, and can provide and can be basically a barrier to Christians giving credence to the rewilding movement. But really, that's all just semantics. So I want to phrase it in a way that removes that whole debate or idea, argument, whatever it might be. So to back up real quick, rewilding, if you look at it as returning to some prior state of being or prior state of optimal health, but it's not just the state of health. It's about taking the human being and returning them back to living in the natural systems that they used to live in. So, for example, for some people, part of rewilding, many rewilders limit their exposure to electromagnetic fields. If they have Wi-Fi in their house, they turn it off at night, or when they're not using their cell phone, they put it into airplane mode or turn it off so that they are not getting as much EMF bombardment. So it's things like that. That just gives you an idea of how in the modern world, that's one way that rewilding can be exhibited in the modern world. And then there's a lot of people, most rewilders also will talk about the benefits of going barefoot and having your feet directly in contact with the earth. Eating natural foods, of course, diet is really big. A lot of rewilders are into foraging and basically finding foods in the wild and hunting. So that's kind of what rewilding looks like, just in a real brief, vague nutshell or a vague idea of what this can look like. So now, as far as how it is phrased or expressed in different groups, to be honest, rewilding is not very common in a lot of Christian groups. I would say probably in any Christian group. It's not really that common. Most rewilders that I know, almost every rewilder that I know, is not Christian. And so definitely to be someone who believes deeply in the Christian faith and who expresses his life through Christian ideology and philosophy really puts me in very much of the minority among the Rewilders. However, there's a burgeoning movement among Christians, at least Christians in the United States, that have been looking for ways to live a more natural life. And this has been ongoing for many years. There have always been Christians who have wanted to live a life that was more back to the land, more natural, organic food. So there have always been groups present that have had closer focuses in some of these areas. But as far as the broader idea of rewilding, that's not common in the Christian world. So about expressing this in a way that I think removes some of the argument or some of the conflict that might occur, we don't have to look at it as in relationship to a pre-human evolutionary state. We can also look at this as we are exploring how our ancestors lived, and also how the people in the Bible lived. How did their life inform their view of things? How did their life inform their view of God, their development of theology? There's a lot of things that we can look at within the Christian context, and there is plenty of room for rewilding in the Christian world. I look at things like, say, King David. We know he wrote many of the Psalms, beautiful, beautiful poetry and songs. Most of them reflect nature. They have imagery of nature, the rabbit that hides in the rocks, and all of this imagery of the sky and the land and the bounty that is provided by water. So we see very much of nature being reflected in the writings of David. But really, if we don't go any further, most of us will enjoy that imagery just as much as we enjoy going on a hike. It's a common thing. It's a casual thing. Oh, look, the sky is beautiful. Oh, look, the water is beautiful. Oh, look, all of this nature around me is beautiful. Beautiful, 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 beautiful. Everything is beautiful. Oh, and I feel so good when I've been on a walk, when I've been out on a hike. I feel so good when I've been in nature. And it doesn't go any deeper than that. But consider this. The characters that we read about in the Bible, the people that we read about in the Bible, they lived 100% of their lives in nature. Now, with wealth, some of them had some buffers between them and nature. For example, a very wealthy person could live in a palace and they could be fed food that was very expensive and that was not necessarily grown in their bioregion. They could wear clothing that they could afford that came from far away, that might interact with the seasons differently than the native clothing of their region. So there are some ways in which the people of the Bible might have had some separation from nature. But generally what you're looking at is these people were born in homes with dirt floors, or some of them in stables. They were born on dirt floors. They lived in houses made of rock and mud. The roofs were made with reeds and timber. They drew their water from a well. There was no distilled water. There was no water that came from any other source except for the ground itself. They often bathed in rivers, lakes, streams, or using the water that was drawn from a well. Their food was grown locally. It might have been grown through agricultural practices, but those practices were much more small scale than what we experience today and much more varied. They had a lot more variety of food in their diets than what we have today. They were immersed in the natural world. What does this mean? This means that we have sacred texts that were given to us by people whose minds were not clouded by EMF bombardment, whose bodies were in tune with the earth around them, who understood the cycles of nature. When God says in Genesis that that the sun by day and the moon and the stars by night, and that they were given for signs and seasons, those people, Jesus Christ, all of them, from our Messiah to every other person in the Bible, they all lived in a system that understood how all of these celestial bodies moved. They understood what they meant. They understood much deeper aspects of nature than the common person living today. Just by virtue, if nothing else, by virtue of the fact that they lived in a society and in a time when they simply did not have buffers between them and nature. So this is what I mean, how that within Christian theology, we have a lot of room to look at this idea and say, how did we used to live? From our time of creation in the Garden of Eden, all the way up until the Industrial Revolution, how did we live? How were we created? Now we can take that word evolved that many other people use, and we can rephrase it so easily and just say, how are we created to live in the natural world? How are we designed to interact? How did God make my feet to respond to the earth when I walk barefoot on the earth? How did God make my skin to react to the sunlight that comes down from the sky? Why is it that when I smell certain things, memories are triggered? Why is it that when I smell certain things that different emotions are brought up? What is it within my natural being and my natural creation that drives me? We have so much more to look at beyond just our mundane modern world that surrounds us. We have an entire history and prehistory to explore. We have an entire ecosystem, an entire biosphere that we can explore. It was made by God. He declared it good. Now, it's not as perfect as it once was, but it is still His creation, and He declared it good. He created an ecosystem that is so interconnected, where everything is so interrelated. It blows my mind. Everything that I discover about the interrelatedness or interconnectedness of different aspects of nature, it's beyond amazing. It blows my mind. God made these intricate systems, and He made us to live in them. So rewilding for the Christian is not about returning to a previous evolutionary state, some pre-human or some evolutionary state. Rewilding for the Christian has a lot more to do with saying, this is God's world. This is an amazing, beautiful, wonderful, mind-blowing creation. How did God really make me? How did God really design me to live in this world? Why is it that my skin creates vitamin D under sunlight bombardment? And what does that mean for how I should design my lifestyle? Why is it that the proprioceptors in my feet do respond to the bare earth when I walk barefoot? And what does that mean for my lifestyle? How can that inform choices that I make? What is the difference between food that is grown in agriculture that is, we could say, organic, but beyond that, we could say small-scale agriculture. We could say locally grown food. We could also say wild food. How is it that my creation is designed to respond to foods that are in their natural or in their wild form, as compared to foods that have been grown outside of natural systems, or foods that have been heavily denatured and altered? So that gives you an idea. I know that this is a very long video. I wanted to apologize for being long, but I won't. I think it's a good discussion to have. So that's what rewilding is. That gives you an idea into, or some insight into how my mind works and processes this as a believing Christian. And I really want to encourage my Christian viewers to explore this idea of rewilding and to start asking yourself, how am I designed? How am I designed to live in the natural world? And how is the natural world designed to benefit me? How is the natural world designed to be a blessing to me? It should be a two-way relationship. God placed all of these things here, And then he placed man in the middle of it. And he said, I've given all of this to you for your benefit. Now go and be a wise steward. Tend this garden. Care for this garden. All of nature has been placed into our hands for us to use and for us to benefit from it. But it has also been placed in our hands for us to care for it. Start asking yourself the question, how is this nature, how is this natural world designed to be my home and to benefit me? And how am I designed to live within the structure of the natural world? I'd love to hear some discussion from other Christians on this. For my friends who are not Christians, I would really like to also hear from you, your thoughts about it. There's obviously a lot of discussion from non-Christians already, but I would like to hear your thoughts about Christians in the rewilding movement, the way that I've phrased it, the way that I've tried to package it in a way that is different from how most rewilders approach this subject. I guess that's all for now, but I really look forward to feedback and discussion and dialogue on this subject. So leave me some comments. Thank you.